there. Vanua Austin is Director of Brand Strategy for Linkia. She was with Meta, and she's been at Linkia now for 2 months, and it is one of the leading marketing platforms, influencer marketing platforms out there. And they have over 100 employees, and they continue to grow. So after the sessions, it'd be great if you can speak to her and ask any questions that you may have with regards to influencer marketing, and she is our expert here for that. Then we have to her left Nicole Murillo, who is head of customer insights for a small company called LinkedIn, and she is also the board chair of North America for AMAC, and we have Jenna Burke here as well from AMAC. So if we want to learn a little bit more about the Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communicators, we can certainly pick their brain on that. Then to Nicole's left, we have Danny Gardner. Danny is from Helion. I don't know if you've heard that company before. They are part of GSK, and Pfizer owns about 32% of them as well. You may have heard of some of their products, Tums, Cincinnati, is it pronounced that right way? And the other product, what is that other product? Advil. Yes, we have all used Advil. He's also very active in socialmedia.org, I believe. No?
That's one of the few that I'm not involved in.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Mary Beth Levin is actually she's been a member of socialmedia.org for 5 years. She is the manager of social media strategy and analytics for United States Postal Service. And I came into contact with Mary Beth 3 years ago. It was right after COVID, where we can go out. It was the first conference in March, and it was a crisis communications conference. And I was just blown away by the content that she provided and all the stories that she was able to talk about at her time at USPS. She was also an associate professor for 17 years at Georgetown Medical School, doing a lot of research over there and helping students. And I think that is it for our speakers. We are going to go right into the conversation here in terms of understanding a little bit about brand intelligence and analytics. So this question goes out to everyone. We'll start with you, Nicole, because you have the microphone, and then we'll pass the baton. I can always give this to you, Mary Beth. Tell us about your roles and how you are involved with intelligence at your organizations.
So before LinkedIn, I was at Ketchum, which is a global agency. And I think intelligence has kind of changed over the years. I think for briefly it was just looking at counting data and seeing what that could tell us, or I think people would use the word listening, but not really know what that meant. So it'd be a quick report on tools or a quick report that might come into your email. So the way we thought about it at Ketchum, the way we're thinking about it at LinkedIn is really putting the audience at the center. Thinking about all the different touch points that they could have and how can we learn from that. So we started thinking through what tools can give us some of that data, what systems do we need to put in place, what maybe mental models do we need to understand the audience. And that's how we approach it. So it's putting that audience at the center, what world surrounds them, and then thinking of your brand, what world surrounds that, where do the two intersect, and using data to help understand that a bit more.
Hi everyone. So my role at Linkia, I'm the Director of Brand Strategy there, which means that I run our creative team. So I'm really using insights to inform the creative concepts that we're coming up with for our clients at a campaign by campaign level, and also their wider creative strategy for the year. So influencers and content creators are the core of what we do, and all important to how they're showing up on social media is understanding the trends that are there, the ones that are a flash in the pan, the ones that are there to stay. And so we're using insights into which influences brands should be working with. We have our own proprietary technology platform, Resonate, through which we're able to identify top influencer and creator talent, to cast them, get them approved by our clients, and then deliver great content and look at the analytics, the performance, what we're going to take to a paid environment. So I'd say using insights and intelligence to make our creative ideas better, stand out. This is a really crowded space. I know from my meta days that on average, each of us scrolls through the height of the Statue of Liberty worth of content every single day. And so brands' content needs to stand out there. But that intersection of taking great data and turning it into magic creative is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and just to kind of build on that, I think the role of intelligence has really evolved, I think over the last few years. So my role is almost exclusively social intelligence, which is, if you haven't heard of that term, it's simply think of it as a combination of the terms business intelligence and social media, two very well established and well understood disciplines. And thinking about what that means today, because I love the stat Fanula just shared, is really just how many eyeballs are on social media content and in feed and going from app to app. Right, there's all these digital touch points that you have to kind of manage. And as Todd had mentioned, we're a new company, but we've always kind of existed through legacy pharma companies, and we market to about 2 billion people every year across the world in 100 plus markets. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge for me. So I oversee all of our social listening research, our tech stack, a lot of methods and kind of new techniques that we use to uncover insights from our consumers. I think that's pretty fundamental today, is that every brand's customers, whether you're B2B or B2C, are online. And I think we follow this really basic kind of North Star, and that we want to be where consumers are. And that's not unique. You hear every company kind of talk about that. But when I think about the people in the company who are closest to the digital front lines, there's really no people closer than my team. And you think about the complexities and just the velocity of data that you look through. That's why business intelligence is so important, or more important than social intelligence. And now my role is kind of taking on a larger remit in being more voice to the customer. So that includes ratings and reviews. That's some elements of call center, survey data, right? Everything from transcribing text that you hear, voice to text. And so there's all these different things that we're kind of thinking about in terms of voice to customer. So that's really what business intelligence will evolve to be, and why we use it across the enterprise today.
Good morning, I'm Mary Beth Levin, and I'm the manager of social media strategy and analytics for the United States Postal Service. So I started the program, the social business intelligence program, from scratch. So it was myself and one other person, and now we're a party of 10. And then we're using those analytics in my new position, where I'm managing not only social business intelligence, but also our publishing team. So basically I'm a business intelligence evangelist, which is a title I never thought I would have. But basically the way I present it is that social media is your world's largest focus group. And this is a conversation that's not driven by marketers. This is a conversation that is driven by your consumers. And they're telling you what is of interest to them, and they are telling you what is important to them. We are actually not based in marketing, which is nice. We're actually based in communications as a part of Center of Excellence model, which means I'm a servant of many masters. And so part of it is talking about what can business intelligence do for you, for communications, for HR, for government relations, for operations. Like, how do we best respond to a natural disaster? For example, for HR, we saw people who were employees who were not representing the brand in the best way. So rather than reprimanding them, why don't we go ahead and start the first social media ambassador program for employees in the federal government? So instead of punishing people, we're promoting them. We also have our own law enforcement agency. So if I see an IP violation, or I see someone threatening one of our employees, I can reach out to the law enforcement agency. So it's never the same day twice. And so we're always looking for innovative ways of taking that data and not use it decoratively, but to use it to make people's lives better.
Thank you. Next question for everyone. What are some of the barriers that you see in the listening space, and what could be done to overcome them?
I think the biggest barrier is that people don't understand necessarily what social listening is, and they say, I think their eyes are bigger than their stomach, and like, I want everything. It ends up being a 96-page report that no one uses. So part of it is educating folks on what can and cannot be done, and how to actually get the answer that they want. So it's not people telling us, oh, I want to know what employees think about COVID, go on LinkedIn. It's like, no, actually we need to go on Reddit. That's where people actually have unbiased conversations, and then translating that data into something that can actually make people's lives better. So to use that example, before I hand it over to Danny, we noticed that some locations were saying we don't have hand sanitizer, or we don't have enough masks. So we were able to locate those locations and reach out to them immediately and say, okay, where are you? We will ship this to you immediately. or if the concerns are like, we don't know how FMLA works, we can change our internal communications. We actually published 200 internal publications in response to what we were hearing from our employees about what they did and didn't understand about COVID and our response to it. Can you tell I'm in case-based studies, because I'm a professor, that's how my mind works.
Thanks, Mary. I also have a microphone. Yeah, I mean, spot on. I think when I look at the challenges of kind of driving, adoption, I think of it kind of in two different buckets. One is building awareness around the capability, right, which is buy-in, and then there's the the tech stack itself, which enables you to access data and insights, right, and have some degree of skill to access that and to get to those points of those nuggets of interest or of insight. So that's where I kind of so I started this team from scratch 4 years ago, and I had nothing. I had no Python code, I had no PowerPoints, I had no queries. There was nothing. I think that it represented a really, really unique challenge for me, but one that wasn't so unique as I found out. I mean, Nicole and Mary and so many other folks, and now Fadula, that I think are kind of either within the social listening space or adjacent to it. And I think there's always kind of been champions for this, but sure enough, I discovered that there's people all over the world that are starting this from their companies too, right? And everyone kind of relates to those two buckets, right? In that we have to drive awareness and adoption for what this data is. Because despite all the hype around what social is, not every company understands it, or uses it, or knows how to use it. So that's one of the, I think, most revealing things that I've seen in talking to companies all over the country and around the world, and where their kind of fundamental challenges lie. And some of it's again, to kind of tie it back together, is in the tech stack and kind of the softer qualitative element of is driving awareness around how the heck you actually use it.
I think some of the barriers are, it was the shiny new object at one point, which means whether I'm in a workshop or not, I ask people like, what is whether it's listening strategy or measurement strategy or intelligence strategy, and I get an answer with a tool name. So they say things like Cision, they say things like Talkwalker, they say things like Onclusive, they say things, kind of through that line. That's not a strategy. And then when they do have that, I'd ask them, okay, how have you set it up? And it's either very simple of just looking at brands, and they haven't really thought of the whole universe. I remember I had a client that was in the consumer snack food area, and I remember they would be like, we want to focus on this. I'm like, take a step back. What's your goal? What are the biggest barriers to you achieving your goal? What are some questions that you have? And as we started digging into it, we realized they had all this data that could be used for research and development on flavor profiles, on creative that they could be using, and they had no idea. They were overspending a ton of money in another area where they had access to a team that was regularly mining what their target audience actually cared about, right? And I think if we're thinking about barriers, people still think of it as a report for when it comes to listening, or they think of it as only social media, but let's be honest, especially with a lot of changes going on, it's easy to get access to, well, for now, Twitter, we know that's changing. But a lot of the other platforms aren't as easy. Like we mentioned, Reddit, that should be on everybody's list. YouTube is the second largest search engine out there because of the way people like to consume information. And search is massive. Surveys, focus groups, there's a lot more when it comes to listening that could solve bigger business problems, and we're still kind of keeping it only within this small lens. And I think that's a big barrier. And as technology changes with AI, with natural language processing, with all this, it's going to be getting easier to make decisions, but it's going to be harder because we're going to have so much data that if you don't have the strategy up front of what is the purpose of this, how can it help, what audiences are it tied to, what goal can I answer, it's not going to be evangelized the way it should, and it's never going to be treated as really the powerhouse that it is, whether it's risk mitigation, whether it's brand intelligence, it's R&D, it does a whole lot more than what I think we're giving it credit for.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, right? Because you're talking about the kind of, there's a huge volume of data. The barrier I was going to flag on the creative side is that too often, although these great tools exist, the social listening that's happening is really manual. And when people are coming up with big creative ideas, whether it's at client side or at their agencies or other partners they're working with, we can fall into a trap of thinking that the social media that I see is the social media that any of you see, right? And so often people tell on themselves. I've heard so many people tell me things like, all TikTok is, and they insert something that shows something about them there. Like, all it is teenage girls in bikinis. And I have to say, I'm sorry, sir, like that's not what I see on TikTok. And so that's one challenge, right, is like getting folks on the creative side to tap into these resources that they have access to, the teams that are more data literate, the tools that they might have subscriptions to that they're never using, and start to move outside their own perspective. And I think that's very important from the diversity side as well, because if I'm speaking to an audience that doesn't look and think like me, I need to see what are they saying on social media and what are conversations that we can tap into. The other barrier challenge that I would say is a lot of the time social listening is still very text-based when we're living in a very visual-first world in social media. We've seen a pivot from just tweets into, video is the primary way that people are communicating. And so one thing that we have at Linkia is integration with Google Vision. So within our Resonate platform, we're able to use the AI to actually read what's happening in images and video content. So that means that if you're Nike, you don't need to rely on someone having mentioned Nike in their caption or tagged them in their post in order to understand in this piece of content someone is wearing Nike shoes. And that's a big pivot here. Social media looks way more visual than it did years ago, and social listening is not just listening to what people say, it's seeing what's in their content and how they're engaging with brands and products.
To build on that, 80% of posts that have a logo in it don't mention the brand by name. So imagine if you're not social listening by doing image and visual recognition, you may be missing a bunch of stuff out there and identifying influencers and things like that. Nicole, you mentioned changes in Twitter, and I have a question for Mary Beth and Danny. We're seeing a rise in ChatGPT, changes in Twitter, apps like Be Real, Common, Go.what are some of the ways social listening and media monitoring tools enhance communications. Can you please, Mary Beth and Danny, tell me what some ways social listening and media monitoring tools are enhancing communications? I know it may be obvious to you, but how are these tools helping?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hype right now. I think when you look at just what the hype cycle is of any technology, right? It's very much hit mainstream marketing. I think to many of us in the profession and in the space, AI is not new. It's been baked into a lot of the mainstream technologies that exist in kind of this profession, and it has been for years. And so we've been using AI in our listening tech stack for a long time. But what's really, going back to Fanula's point, is kind of really the next phase and evolution of social listening is really visual analytics and intelligence and image recognition. And I mean, the challenge with that is that it requires a lot of training, right? To train models for accuracy and fit, you have to give a lot of data, which is also a fundamental issue in the social listening industry. It's just access to historical data. It's really expensive to gather a lot of this stuff, as I've learned. And so that's what I think the real opportunity is that take a brand like Advil or any of our brands really, right? There's plenty of mentions where people just either show the product or show the logo or the packaging, right? So some of these are really recognizable, but we're not actively training this because the technology hasn't always existed, right? And so that's the same threat that exists for every company and brand in the world. Maybe some less so than others. You get big names like Apple and Google and Tesla. Those are names that are a lot of these SaaS companies are kind of training these logos out of the box. But what about something unique for us, right? What maybe one of our smaller brands. So that was just to kind of cap off Fanula's point. But still tied to I think AI and ChatGPT. That's kind of the mainstream technology today, which we've been using actively with caution. I think there's a lot of hesitancy around what brands can do and use with it. But it's my kind of ideology around is that it can strip out a lot of the mundane, right? A lot of the stuff that's too time intensive, right? That's hey Danny, go read 9,000 posts. I would never go do that, and I think that's where we feed a model like this, right? Think about the scale economies that exist for a company that has 30 brands. How about a company that's got 100 brands, right? And so that's where we think of the massive upside for what this is, and we train and test some of this stuff in kind of compartments. So it's isolated, and I think these learning models get more and more sophisticated. And at some point, OpenAI will create an environment where we can basically offer you your own little cubicle, right? You don't have to worry about your data being fed back into a larger corpus of data accessible by your competitors or who knows who. So there's a lot of I think really exciting things about the AI space and where it's kind of influencing us. And it's really going back to Todd's question, a matter of efficiency, right? I mean, the comms and messaging and a lot of the use cases we have that doesn't really change is the speed at which we can do it and the breadth at which we can do it. So that's what I see as the largest upside. I could very well be wrong. I think we're still very much in the early age of what AI applications exist. but having been in the field for many years now, and having used an AI regularly, and debunking myths, and breaking apart the black boxes, and generating buy-in and awareness at the highest levels of our company, ChatGPT is no different, right? It's the same kind of fundamental approach that we're using to drive the same efficiencies we always have.
Well, we could have a whole session just on this one question, so let me just break it down real quick. So for ChatGPT, there's no transparency about the source, and we know it can hallucinate. So in terms of how seriously we should take it, you should be aware of it, particularly if you're an industry that relies on it, for example, like travel and tourism. You should also just be aware of what they're saying about you, because someone may say, well, I asked ChatGPT and this is what they said, but how much you put behind it, that's something to be wary of. In terms of AI, we've been using it forever, particularly with sentiment assignment, which I'm very passionate about. I'm not a huge fan. I think it tells you the what, but not the why. This is why we will never be replaced by machines. Okay, they will tell you why people love it or why they hate it, but they won't tell you why exactly, and that's where real people come into place. That's why I'm not into sentiment. I tend to use sentiment more as a thermostat rather than aspirationally. So if I see it go from one direction to the other, that means I need to take a deeper dive. In terms of justifying our social customer response, I developed something called sentiment conversion, where to what extent can the person turn a frown upside down, and that's how we actually developed, basically establish and maintain people's jobs in customer response. In terms of Twitter, I know some people are leaving Twitter. We'll never leave Twitter. 2/3 of our customers who come to us asking us for help are on Twitter, so we need to be where they're at. One of the issues with the software is that a lot of folks really put their eggs in that Twitter basket. And I remember that there was another company we went to, and I said, you're not very robust on Facebook. And this is an issue, a larger issue with software companies where they have this very extensive, ambitious menu, but just because they have it doesn't mean that they do it well. And so they kind of teased me like, well, Twitter is really cool and Facebook's not cool. And my response is, we serve all the American people. They didn't really embrace that philosophy, so we consciously uncoupled and went to another software agency that was a little more comprehensive, because we need to hear what everyone is saying. We still rely on Twitter just because that's where some of the more volatile issues tend to occur first. Also looking at journalists, they're going to be live tweeting an event, which is going to give us a beat on what they're going to be writing their article about. They're not going to live tweet on Instagram, for example. So we still need to have a presence there. But is it the end all be all? No, because we're here to serve everyone. Let's see, what was the other thing? Yeah, I think I pretty much covered it. But again, this could be its own conversation in terms of where we're going. But part of it is that you need to know that different platforms serve different purposes. In order to answer the question that you want, you need to have access to that particular platform.
So this question is for Nicole. What are your thoughts on the evolving role of PR marketing tools in shaping effective communication strategies?
Wow, that's a heavy one. I think, when I sometimes do some talks at conferences, there's a slide, and I'm blanking on who puts it together, but every year they put out the new tech stack, the new MarTech stack. It is a scary, scary slide. There are thousands of different technologies that go on this. And each year they cluster them and they try to make it a little more organized, but it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So when it comes to technology, I think we heard this is, first ask yourself, what are you trying to understand? So what's the business goal? What's your objective as a communicator, as a marketer to help achieve that? Who are the audiences that are going to help do that? Now ask yourself, what touch points could they have with what you are creating? And that's how you build your tech stack. You don't need every tool under the sun, and most of the clients I've ever worked with, and even some very large ones right now at LinkedIn, the more tech they have, the worse they do on some of their listening, because they don't know how to use it. I remember I was at a conference, and this gentleman, who I'm blanking on his name right now, but he ran Insights, I think for Unilever or something, for years, and he got up and he said, dashboards dash hopes. And I was like, I have never felt more connected to somebody in my life. And I think we all have heard that, where I get things like, hey, make me a dashboard. And I'm like, but why? What are you going to use it for, right? How many of us have spent a ton of time on making something look pretty, but then no one actively uses it? So how is technology shaping it? I think it's giving us insight that we can ask smarter questions. We can be more aware of what's out there. We can think through different touch points that we haven't had access to in the past. We had to guess, we had to assume, but we now can access a lot of this and more efficiently. And even ChatGPT or whatever's in the future, my team used to spend hours writing SQL code They can use ChatGPT to get the beginnings part and then take it off and do that Boolean. Think about how much time you spend there, right? So I think if we're thinking about how technology is shaping it, it's ideally getting us to a smarter question faster so that we can ideate on the solution and the strategy that comes from it. I think what we're falling into is then people expecting it to be this magic wizard that gives them all the answers. And that's where we're not setting up teams in a way to bring that insight to life. So I think the future of it is how do we get smarter faster using the right tools, not all the tools. And don't believe the hype on a lot of the tools, and then continue moving that so it just creates better strategy over time.
Thank you. Mary Beth, this is a favorite question of mine in all the questions here because I'm a crisis guy and I love that kind of stuff, and you're a crisis expert and also reputation management. Can you share some examples where your monitoring programs have played a crucial role in crisis management and reputation?
Absolutely. So I believe very strongly that the software should work for you and not the other way around. So real-time alerts, and it can be whatever constituency is important to you. So if it happens to be members of Congress or industry insiders or certain reporters, they can give you a heads up about what's going on. Again, you can also set up a dashboard. I know how you feel about dashboards, but if you see something like website, for example, goes up 150%, that's an indicator that you need to do something about it. You can also set up a variety of alerts for if you get a large number of a particular topic or a large number of responses on a particular post. We actually use AI to categorize our incoming posts by level of urgency for customer service response. I think people really underestimate customer service response in terms of generating and handling a crisis. What we find is that people will give us a first bite of the apple, and then if we don't give them a timely response, then it becomes trending on a national radio show, or it becomes the evening news with Lester Holt, or it becomes the source of a congressional inquiry. Of course, I'm not talking about personal experience here, but yeah, all those things have happened. So what we do is we actually use AI and we qualify it in terms of the level of urgency, the type of issue, and then the number of followers. So I know customer service is you're supposed to treat everyone well, but this is more like Animal Farm where all animals are equal and some animals are more equal than others. So for example, my Huckabee loses a package, 800 people lose their minds, and that prevents us from addressing an issue in a timely manner. Other issues, a lot of particularly HR issues, we actually have HR embedded in social customer response to deal with those issues. So if an employee does something inappropriate and it's caught on videotape, we can address that right away before it actually gets part of the LA Times. And yes, of course, I am speaking from personal experience. So part of it is really having those systems set up so that way you're not caught unawares.
And you only have 10 staffers for how many people in your organization?
655,000.
655,000. This question is for everybody. Aside from budget, what challenges, if any, have you faced when trying to implement social listening and meeting monitoring strategies within your organization?
Yeah, I can kick off here, and I'm going to talk more about how we actually take what we're hearing from social listening and then turn it into what are we going to do about it. And the barrier I want to flag here is that the speed of response, the speed of approvals is something that can really hurt us when we talk about capitalizing on a trend that we've identified through social listening. So we have lots of clients who say we want to be reacting in real time. We know the trends change week by week on Reels, on TikTok and beyond. How can we be part of that? And how can we embed our brand and culture using influences? But this can be really challenging because some trends have a very short shelf life. And there's this question of, we've noticed this happening, how quickly can we capitalize on it? I think there are a few solutions here. I think the first is having a more ongoing relationship with influencers and content creators for the year, having that talent pre-approved, so if something changes, we can move really quickly. I think another thing you can do is you can have your influencer partner be embedded in your interagency teams. So if anybody notices something that's coming up, whether it's just naturally in the news cycle or through a social media listening tool that an agency on that team is using, that we're well primed to come up with a response, and activating influencers can be a really speedy way to do that. So yes, speed for me. It's like, we've noticed the things happening, but what are we going to do about it?
I think education and enablement are probably two of the biggest barriers. So again, people immediately assume if they have a tool or if they have a team of 1 or 2, it's solved. Like, oh, they're just going to do everything for me. When I was in agency world, let's be honest, most tools are made for the PR and communications people. They're not made for the analytics team that I ran. Yes, we use the data, but it was made for that reason. I can't tell you how many people on the PR comm side would be like, oh, I black out when I look at Excel. I black out when I look at Boolean. I can't talk about this, right? That's not, we all need to be data literate. Actually, at our recent Amex Summit, there was some survey data that was put out, and I'm going to blank on it right now, but it was a scary high volume of people who admitted to delivering a stat in a client meeting that they had no idea what it meant, right? So if you think about what I think the biggest barriers are, is educating to a certain level of data literacy for everybody, because that enables us to then use all the information we have. So it doesn't just go into a black hole. I remember a CEO of a company one time, this other agency, not mine, spoke at, they delivered beautiful data, but it was about a 90-page deck. And at the end, the CEO picked it up, threw it on the table, and goes, well, what the hell do I do with this, right? And I think that's where, if we are not creating teams, companies, and systems that know how to use this information, know what they should be looking for, then it's going to become just reports that nobody looks at. So I think kind of education and enablement are some of the biggest barriers to understanding the power that it could be.
Yeah, and to echo all that, I really want to underscore data literacy, which is, I have the fortune of getting to present at a lot of different industry events, and we presented methodologies and case studies, and a lot of different things that we do. And one of the consensus kind of insights I've taken away from talking to people at all levels of the organization is data literacy. That there's just this fun, and this is not just a social media thing. This is just general, any form of analytics or piece of data that you use, is that people don't always understand where you get it, how you get it, and then how to use it. And so I think there's a certain element of upskilling that we do, and training that we introduce. It's not, my boss calls it dog and pony show, and she has for a few years. But I mean, there's a lot of truth to it, right? And there's a lot of I think success we've seen in telling the same story every year to refresh people on how to use data, where it comes from. Because speaking as the social listening guy, there's a lot of data. I mean, I could spend 10 minutes talking about every source and the intricacies of why Reddit's so difficult to query and access, and insights that are unique to that. Same thing for Instagram or walled garden, right? I think I could spend 20 minutes talking about each of them. But that's why we set aside a time, in a day every year. Right? You think people understand social media because they're on it? They really don't. And I think like that, and that's okay, right? And there's a certain degree of understanding I think you have to have when you meet with your teams and try to drive awareness around what this is. And I speak as someone who has adopted 2 models, right? A self-service model, which is what I completely appreciate Nicole's point about dashboards, but it's actually been one of our most successful things. In a large enterprise, we're not as big as the USPS. We've got 22,000 people, and I think I have about, yeah, thanks for math checking me, Todd. And you lose perspective too in the size of some of these companies. Even a 5,000 person company is a big company, but subjectively. But I think one of the things that we've adopted is both a self-service model and a spoon-fed model. Right? I think for a long time when we first started, a lot of the insights came directly from me. Right? So now it was me telling myself and my team, hey, let's call down the 90 deck slides, or the 90 deck presentations. And now my presentations in some cases are 3 or 4 slides, because that's all it has to be. And I think like that's I think kind of what we learned early on is that sometimes the answers are right in front of us. Sometimes the answer is just one sentence. Sometimes it's just an email. And so I think we tend in analytics to have a tendency to overcomplicate things and throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, which is fine for discovery exercises. But I think that's where we've had elements of there's stuff that I really need to handle and my team handles, and then there's stuff that again we've been very successful with dashboards. That if someone wants to come to me and says, how many mentions of Flonase did I have in the last 24 hours, or how many flavor mentions of raspberry version C did we have in the last week. I can go in and self-service that, right? Or any number of those questions. And so you're eliminating a lot of the basic, you're creating a feedback loop and reducing a lot of the time that you're otherwise spending to dig out data and pull it through. And I know, because I've been there, because I know what it's like to start this team from scratch and have to do all this, right? But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And looking back now, we're very comfortable and very successful with this kind of 2-pronged approach. Certain things should be self-service and through a dashboard, certain things shouldn't be.
So there are at least 4 challenges. One is that we're the federal government. The other is folks weren't sure if we were friend or foe. The other was that people didn't know what we did, and they didn't know how to use us. So you can imagine the federal government. We developed a heat map which maps down to the 5-digit zip code where customer concerns are coming from, as well as online reviews from 35 different review sites. But it took a year just to get approval to store things on Google Cloud, and we were asked questions like, can we do a site visit? Things like that. So there's a certain amount, thank you for laughing. So this was an educational process for me in that I learned that I was not as patient as a person that I'd like to think that I am, but having to go through those processes year after year after year, walking and hiking is cheaper than therapy, but this is part of working with a very large organization, is that it's not a hot spot for nimble decision making. So for every decision we had to do protecting PII, we would demonstrate it with scrubbing, and they'd say, well, what if someone tags themselves? I'm like, don't worry, this is what we have covered. So there was an educational process, and everything took a year to accomplish. Some people, thought that we were trying to take their jobs, and they would try to ding us, like, oh, did you see this? And did you see this article? Did you see this tweet? I'm like, yes, we have an alert. We already sent it to government relations. That member of Congress mentioned us, like, oh, and I'm like, yeah. So that was the second one. The third one is people weren't sure who we were, what we do. So we're on the top floor. We have one wall that's completely glass. I sort of think of it as an aquarium, but I've been told that that diminishes the importance of our work. So I call it a war room or situation room instead. And it's got like an NCIS set up with one wall of just screens, and people would like sort of look at us. I'm like, come on in, the water's fine. We'll explain who we are and what we do. And so we have the dog and pony show down to an art where I would just do an introduction, then different members of the team, because I believe in leadership development, would talk about different aspects of our work. And for one of our team members, it was distracting, but for me, it's better annoyed than unemployed. That this educational process is part of the rent that we pay in order to do this work. We also did things like social media salons. So I would set things up like a visitor's room within a conference with the best goodies and the charging stations and the large screens, and there would be a different screen demonstrating one aspect of the work with a little placard explaining it. We had someone live responding to customers. And you could see the customer's response on like a large screen behind them, so it was very interactive. I batted my eyelashes with the management and got the most comfortable couches in this room. So whatever it took, there was absolutely no shame in my game to get people there, because part of it is, as a team leader, job security is a concern for me, particularly in a federal agency. And we even had to do a film once. We did a 4-minute film explaining who we are, so if we weren't able to go to that conference, they showed the film. So for me personally, the idea of my face being 20 feet big is kind of terrifying, but if that's what it takes to ensure that my team remains employed, that's what I'm willing to do. The other thing is always trying to find new use cases, and how do we evangelize and share with folks what we can do. So to give you one quick example, we have a partnership with Vans shoes, and so they've got the USPS logo on Vans shoes, and that's totally been approved. And then when I was looking at trending posts, I noticed another company was using our IP without our knowledge or consent, so I forwarded that to marketing and to the legal team. They're like, we had no idea that Nike was using our stuff. They don't have our permission to do that. And then Nike refused to come to the table to negotiate with us. And so we did more research, and we just kept showing Nike all the bad publicity they were getting on social media through our social listening. And that beating of the drum got them to the table to negotiate a deal with us. So that's one example of how we just sort of created our own work.
Super examples. This question goes to Nicole Pinula. We're seeing rise in influencers, nano-influencers, nano, macro, micro, and what are some of the things to consider in influencer identification, selection, and how can tools help us do this better?
I think hopefully we're all past the time where a lot of my clients would still say they want the celebrity or the big name and not really think why, right? There's a lot of examples out there where companies choose an influencer because they seem really popular, but their audience has no actual connection to them. So from my Ketchum times, we did something with the American Egg Board. It's very cool, I know. But they were getting ready for Easter, and they wanted to do an influencer campaign to try to increase the sale of eggs, which hadn't changed for years. They couldn't figure out a way to break through and get people maybe to consume more. And when we were trying to help them understand, like, take a minute, let's not go after these big name influencers you want, let us do some research. We first started trying to understand what's the lowest hanging fruit for people to buy more eggs. Is it the people who already buy like 1 carton a month? Is it the people who buy 2? Is it the people who don't buy them? Like, where is that? And it turned out it was the person to buy maybe 1 more carton, right? So we used data to find out which influencers have audiences that already buy eggs, but not at an extreme amount, right? So we needed purchase data to do that. We needed to connect to the back end. There was a larger tech stack to do this. But what it did was we were able to prove the celebrity they wanted to go for and pay a ton of money actually had an entire audience that was very weird about protein. Like, they were very, maybe it might be plant only or this, so they weren't gonna buy eggs. There was a huge barrier to that. Instead, we found influencers who their audience already spoke about, 1, cooking. They spoke about, 2, trying to find alternative and more ways to cook for families or themselves at home. And they hadn't hit the threshold of buying too many eggs yet. And so we were able to tell them, these are the audiences, the influencers that you should actually go for. And for the first time in years, they actually increased the market share for eggs during their Easter season. So yes, we had a great tech stack that allowed us to do that, but I think an example is an influencer is only as good as how engaged their audience is, and engaged isn't just how many people follow them, it's what they are talking about and actions they actually take from that. So it's making sure you're doing your research of what the target audience that you're trying to change a behavior, a perception, or an action from. What are you trying to change? Who are they? And who are the influencers that can speak to that? Because if you choose the big one, they weren't going to change the thing for eggs. Sure, you got to probably would say impressions more than their people are on the planet and a nice little pitch deck, and it would look great, but it wouldn't actually show impact. So I think when it comes to data and looking at influencers, it's making sure you're actually looking for what impact are you trying to get from this, and going from there, making sure you're really looking at their audience for true indicators for that, and not just the flashy ones.
This is the core of what we do at Linkia, is using our tool Resonate in order to find the best influences and other talent for our brand partners to be working with. So +1, everything Nicole just said. Some other things that I would flag here is, of course, audience demographics are super important. Engagement rate is really important. We have minimums across our campaigns. We can tailor those to the brands that we're working with. We also want to look at things like fraud detection. So seeing, has there been a sudden spike in the follower count? Is this person buying attention online? We don't want that. We want people with genuinely engaged audiences. Where is that audience? So we operate right now just in the United States. We want to make sure that a significant percentage of the audience that an influencer has is based in the country, if that's where we're trying to move the needle for that brand. We also want to look at things like past performance. So is this a talent that we've worked with in the past, and have they performed for brands that they've worked with? Previous partnerships, obviously there are often competitive exclusions from brands. They don't want someone who's worked with a direct competitor before. We're able to pull all of that through the tool. Some other things I'd flag here. So you mentioned celebrity. Our perspective is there is still a role for big name talent, but I totally agree that it needs to be really thoughtfully done. And you need to be strategic about what role can big name talent play. And from where we're sat, we see them as very upper funnel, awareness based. If you've got a new product and you need people to know about it, having a celebrity talent speak about its existence is a really great strategy. Versus if you want people to genuinely believe that this is a product that a talent is using and that they should consider purchasing too, going to that more kind of micro, macro tier, or even a nano tier might be the way to do it. If you're becoming a parent, for instance, seeing what other recent parents have bought for their first child might be much more compelling than a big name celebrity like a Kardashian. So the other thing I'd flag here is, there's celebrity on one end. Obviously, we've been using this word influencer, is we've been having a lot of conversations about content creators as well. And this is where audience becomes less important. We're seeing a real trend of brands tapping into social media content creators as a production solution. So it's so important to have great content that feels socially native. That's true whether you're running your brand's organic accounts whether you're on the paid media side, right? Like I come from Meta, we talked about creative fatigue all the time. There's a need for great content to be cycled into paid media in order to continue to deliver results and make sure you're not plateauing when it comes to kind of just doing the same DR message on your ads again and again and again. And tapping people who are great content creators, whether or not they have substantial audiences, can be a really compelling proposition for solving those needs. So we have an offering called Fill the Feed, which we have as an add-on to many of the campaigns we're doing. This is not about getting influencers to post. It's about using the power of content creators to make social-first content that then the brand can be putting out there on their own social channels, on paid, and even beyond. This is the language of how people are communicating. So take it to your out-of-home, take it to TV, take it to sports stadiums. This is how especially younger generations are communicating. And identifying that talent is going to be really important as well, having that quality control and making sure that we're actually contracting people who are fluent in social trends and delivering great content against it.
Yes, please.
I think also from a B2B aspect, so obviously at LinkedIn, we know there's the 95-5 rule, which means at any given time, only 5% of your target audience is actually in market for your product, right? So 95% of them are living their life. And if you put all your budget on that 5%, they might not even choose you. You might not even be on their consideration set, right? So it's how are you thinking through that 95% that are living their lives and eventually are going to go into the buying cycle? And an influencer is a great way of doing that. When it comes to B2B, a lot of times it's who's an expert with influence. And so you have to also use data to understand, are they just saying they're an expert? Are they actually an expert? And then also looking on things like on platform. Does their audience just like, or do they share? Do they then follow a call to action that leads to a marketing qualified lead? How often do those leads turn into sales qualified leads? So I think influencer, a part that often gets forgotten is the connection between marketing and sales alignment. And it's sometimes only pictured as either just the big brand, which is critical. You need to create that umbrella for the 95-5, or they only look at demand, when in reality they play a merging of those two roles, because that helps you get to that 95%. So by the time they're ready to go into market, you're already part of the consideration set. Because if you're not, you're never gonna be. And I think that's a role that influencer can play. So making sure that your company, your brand understands that there's multiple roles an influencer can play, as you're saying, and there's different areas to focus in on. And if you are in that B2B space or working for the government, or if there's nutrition, like that was huge. There's so many people out there saying that they're a nutritionist, they're not. So how do you get the certified nutritionists? And we would use, like, scrape the nutrition database and look for them, and did they write a book? Are they posted on social? And moments like that to bring it to life. But I think a lot of times they get used either for just demand or just awareness, when in reality, if you think through the whole influencer campaign for a branded demand and that 95-5 rule, I think they have a lot more use case and you can get a lot more information from it.
Thank you. Mary Beth, question for you and Nicole. What are your tips for measuring the impact of communication strategies through the insights gained from tech tools?
So for me, it's, did it make a difference? Did we actually do things differently? So, for example, when Hurricane Maria came out, we were doing a lot of social listening and people were expressing a concern about theft in the mail. We reported it and it turned out that people were stealing packages. It wasn't us, it was actually an employee at the airport, but the fact that that got a response, that to me is a win. It also influenced our communication. So our communication was, if people want to send a lot of stuff very quickly, as affordably as possible, so that spoke to one of our products, if it fits, it ships, but then we noticed that items are opening in transit, so that changed our communications, which is it fits, it ships, but don't overstuff it. So the fact that it informed communications, the fact that it informed operations, that made a difference. And then the fact that it led to the development of the recognition that we need to start having information in Spanish for the first time, which for me being from Los Angeles was sort of a no-brainer. The fact that it actually made that difference really has an impact. I think part of it is, I'm a data geek, so it is, does the data make a difference? So when the heat map leads to a 54% reduction in concerns coming to us in social media because we've addressed concerns or anticipated concerns, that's something to brag about. If our online reviews have gone up 17% because of the feedback we're giving, that tells us that we're providing better service. That to me is, basically it's like you can say, does it make a difference? Do I have the data to show that it makes a difference? And the answer is yes to one or both. Then we know that we can justify our existence.
All right, this is always a sad part for me, but how many people have heard of AMEC? Yes. All right. Okay. Getting better each time. So it is the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. You could probably get why we just call it AMEC. But one of the things that I think we make a really good point, there's a ton of free tools for everyone to use that, so I definitely recommend taking a look at amecorg.com. But when you are setting up measurement or analytics, so the point just made, it needs to prove a so what, a now what, what's that impact, right? And too often, again, it's immediately, here's the tool, or the dashboard, which is a great tool, we all need them, as we heard, for efficiency, but that's not the answer, right? It's what you use that information for. And when I've run workshops or not, I always thought the hardest part was gonna be helping people pick the data or the KPIs. Most people can't get past stage one, which is what is the business goal? What is the business objective? They can't answer it. I was just at the PRSA travel conference in a room of about a couple hundred people, and like 2 people were able to raise their hand that they felt confident that they were able to give the elevator pitch of what the business goal was, right? So when you're thinking about measurement and analytics, don't just jump into here's the data. It's asking yourself, if you had 2 minutes with the CEO or your board member or your boss's boss, if you had a few minutes with them, what would they say is the goal? What would they say is gonna fail, like we don't meet our goal? How do we as communicators and marketers achieve that? Who are the audiences that we need to interact with? What's the landscape that we're fighting against? And suddenly you're starting to realize, okay, I need to prove that we were able to increase positive outcomes from, like that we just heard. Or if, what are the ways that you can start showing proxy metrics, or maybe you have budget to really show true impact. You're not gonna do that if you immediately just start with metrics. So meaning, you wanna have SMART goals, meaning like they have to be specific, they have to be measurable, attainable, all the other things that I'm blanking on right now. But they have to have the specifics in there. And then if your answer to all of that is, I got X number of media impressions, I got X number of engagements, you're gonna have leaders that are just gonna look at you and be like, what does this mean? And your budget's gonna go down. So how do you speak in the language of the people that you're working with, and how do you try to make sure you have data that you can answer those questions? So when it comes to measurement, and showing that evaluation and showing that impact, you need to speak in the business language. You also need to show what next steps are and how you're circulating and coming back through, and you're constantly optimizing and working through that. So there's a lot that goes into this. Highly recommend looking at amecorg.com for the planning framework and the integrated evaluation framework to help you out there.
Danny, you've been so quiet. This question's only for you. What are some of the other uses of these tools as opposed to proof of value?
Yeah, I think again, going back to a lot of the fundamental cases that we've had, it's all about keeping a pulse on what our consumers think, feel, like, dislike, and so that's one of the most basic learnings we've had that's still true today. And that when we introduce new products, right, it's more than just I think in our early stages it's all about proving why we should have this capability internally. And the basic answer is it's cost savings. Like the industry is mature enough, there's enough people with skill that can come into a big company like this and kind of orchestrate all these different pieces. And it's really, really difficult, but there's a lot more people that can do it. And I think there's always been people that have had this skill. And so we moved out of that phase in the first year. Second year was COVID. And so we saw a dramatic acceleration, much like every other form of digital media did. And then coming into year 3, year 4, now everything's less reactive, it's more proactive. Right? We use this data on offense. Right? It's everything from competitive intelligence. Right? I use this example, which I actually used during COVID. We competed against the company Burt's Bees. And I remember it was one of the first listening cases I did in Competitive Insights. And I unpacked Burt's Bees, their influencer strategy on Instagram in maybe like an hour. Between the 42 or so like influencers that happen to be using, their split versus micro and macro, and then I guess I didn't look at it in terms of nano, but there were a few nano influencers. The average engagement they had per post. I remember like using a lot of like Boolean query skills, and I remember like just thinking how much we could do with this data to unpack what other brands are doing. But I also I think learned over time is that just because one brand's doing one thing doesn't mean we should. So it became a little bit more directional, and I matured over time too. Thinking, hey, not all of my recommendations have to be, let's do what our competitors do. But, there is an advantage to second mover. or to being a second mover. And so there's certain things we've learned that way too. But I always think back to that Burt's Bees example because I could very easily do the same thing for any other brand. But the biggest challenge for us is that, if any of you go to CVS or Rite Aid or Going Read, right? I mean, walk down the medicine aisle. We could be cough, cold, flu, pain relief, smoking cessation, vitamins, minerals, and supplements. There's an unbelievable amount of competitors that we face, and a lot of them are D2Cs, right? A lot of them are kind of born out of the internet, right? Born out of social, where they only have an Instagram handle, right? And their entire marketing mix is social. Look at a company like Olipop or Duolingo, right? They're all kind of reactive social, right? And all their eggs are in that basket, right? They're not trying to reach hundreds of millions of people through linear TV. We are, because we're legacy brands, and that's always going to be part of our mix and a huge part of it. But we have to think more like D2Cs today. I think that's been kind of the rallying cry for me in kind of our cases. And to tie back to your question, that's probably one of the coolest things we get to work on today is competitive listening intelligence. Right? It's one thing to be able to listen for one brand, listen for 30 brands, then be able to put on the same hat and do it for either a white space topic, which isn't our brand, maybe something beyond our space like Chipotle, and then we look to them, a best in class social team, and everything for people in our category. Right? Assets that we don't regularly look at, maintain. And again, we go back to dashboards. That's what helps me as a power user manage all of this and really do the work of 5 or 6 people. And I think that's, my job isn't unique in that way because technology enables a lot of us to do more than 1 or 2 jobs. So that's kind of the efficiencies we're seeing now. That's the kind of use cases where we're driving even more value is beyond just, hey, it's good to have and when we need it, but you know what? It's always on. We're always using it. We're always keeping it's not just keeping a pulse. It's trying to find the next big thing, right? And the next big charcoal toothpaste, which at some point was, a trend in infancy. It was in a small little community, small little bubble, and the next thing you know, it's big and mainstream. And now it's kind of phased out. But what's the next big thing? So that's really, really difficult, and we're using social as maybe just one of so many different signals to be able to move to basically be the first mover, right? When you work for a big company, things run out as fast as a small company, startup that's got 10 people. Right? So that makes all the difference for us as a large enterprise, and we're really trying to uncover and drive breakthrough in our company today. Thank you for the question.
Absolutely. This question and our final question before we go to you is for everyone. What future trends do you foresee in social listening, media monitoring, and communications analysis, and how will they shape the way organizations communicate with their audiences?
It's like Nicole was reading my mind because I was going to say something, obviously influencer related, very similar about kind of the shift of using influencers just for top of funnel to looking at their impact throughout the funnel. And I think with any kind of new marketing tactic, we often start in this kind of awareness space before we fully understand what role that new tactic can play at the lower levels of the funnel as well. And so I'm really excited on the analytics side about continuing to prove out the importance of influencers for driving purchases. Shout out to Haleon here, Danny. We've done some recent work on Emergency and Advil and Centrum where we were able to drive that sales lift as well as the brand lift, which is really important here too. And so understanding and being able to predict which influencers are going to drive sales or drive app downloads or drive the behavior that you're hoping to shift is going to be so important. Influencer is moving out of just the PR space, out of the silo, out of organic, into being a really key part of the marketing mix throughout the funnel, into paid media. And we've got to prove out the value, right? Especially in a world where we're going to see AI influencers, a world in which everyone says they're an influencer. I think 1 in 4 Gen Zers now say that they actually are planning to become a social media influencer. So being able to find who are the folks who are going to move product for you and drive business results and having the analytics set up to prove that is going to be important.
Trends. I think one big one is going to be privacy. So as we're looking into the future, there were some really great new technology in the past couple of years that were able to connect directly to a user or connect those data points on the back end. There's a lot of new policy, there's a lot of new kind of rules coming out that we have to be very careful. That's not going to be as easy. So looking to really crack that, how do you connect PII safely to the work that we do to have a better understanding there. I think clean room technology is something that we're going to be seeing come through quite a bit. There's places like hospitals and all that have been looking at this for years. I think everyone else is going to need to start thinking about that, of how can they look to connect the dots through privacy and being able to understand that user behavior a bit better. I think tolerance for numbers that we can't fully explain is going to just keep coming down, meaning we're going to get a lot more, what does this mean, so what, and then prove your value. I've had a lot of people come up and ask, like, I'm getting asked for a return on blank, really any job that it might be, what is the return on blank? And I think if we don't start taking that step back and asking what other data is out there within our organization, what are other ways that we can connect, how do we ask more from some of our technology partners in the space to really connect those dots. We're gonna kind of look back to the very beginning. Some of the barriers are people don't understand what we do, they don't understand the value, and they don't understand how it can help everybody. So if we can't crack the privacy nugget and we can't help answer the return on blank, I think we're gonna have some trouble. And so how do we look at the landscape that I think a new technology comes out like every single day, AI is gonna create even more of them. How are we asking the right questions and evolving as a kind of industry as we move forward?
Yeah, and I agree with everything that's kind of been said, and just to really kind of reiterate what I see like is the next big thing, which is everything again around visual intelligence, and it touches elements of influence, right? AI and deepfake technology, right? There's a lot of different things that kind of fold into what AI is, and brand protection and consumer insights, and a lot of different cases we touch today. Data privacy is a big one, and I think anytime I'm sitting at a round table with analytics executives, it's always like the least voted one is data privacy. But it's a very, very real threat, and we take it very seriously. And as do most large enterprises and companies that have to manage really, really kind of complex infrastructure for how data moves in and out of the company. And so that's certainly the case with social, right? You think about this idea of, remember learning, I forget who it was who taught me a couple of years ago, this the fake influencer, the virtual influencers, like not real people. I was amazed by that. And now it's more mainstream too, when you have AI that can create characters and avatars that don't exist and have millions and millions of followers that people believe follow and interact with them. And I think there's a larger, I know people don't talk about the metaverse anymore, but that's still very much a real thing. The metaverse is many, many different things, right? It's elements of a social network, it's transactions, right? It's a payment system, right? Elements of e-commerce, right? There's augmented reality, and I think there's a lot of different things that kind of fold into what it is. Mark Zuckerberg might think that their particular system, is going a different direction, but what that means for us as social media professionals is, well, we know consumers are going to be there, right? In the next 20 years, the next generation consumer that we're even further apart from, right? They understand technologies and they hang out in places that we never did. I was part of the last generation where we grew up playing outside. Now you look at today's generation and youth; they've all grown up as digital natives. They've all grown up with screens. It's a much different world. I think that's one of the things that we're struggling with, and every brand is describing and categorizing what the next big social media is going to be. Right? You heard of Lemonade, you heard of Mastodon. A lot of these were kind of flashes in the pan. You could unpack all those brands that we did, but the next big thing is just around the corner, and that's what I think keeps us excited. It also will keep kind of keeps us up at night. Going back to elements of visual intelligence, you think about what's kind of been said here before. Right? There's an emphasis on short form media, and now what kind of interesting insight that I've been seeing is that you hear a lot of other experts talk about the fact that long form media. I saw a great case from Uber actually a couple months ago. That was like their most successful TikToks aren't the 6 or 15 second increments, they're the 45 second increments. They broke down some of the data I didn't fully understand. Not because it wasn't accurate, because I didn't understand paid media as well. But it was really, really impressive where we see that shift. And we work with Amazon, and we have a team at Twitch, and that's all about live streaming, right? People are willing to spend time online and sit in a session for 3 hours, right? So you think about the short attention span, which is there, right? So that's kind of one kind of behavior. And then another where it's like, hey, people will watch a YouTube stream because it's all driven by their favorite creators, right? So that's, I go on a tangent about the creator economy, and all of this is intertwined, but at the heart of it, there's a degree in analytics, really sophisticated analytics, machine learning, all these elements that are going to help brands kind of navigate the next 10, 15, 20 years. Really, really advanced technology, and we really just kind of scratch the surface of what's possible. So that's what keeps me excited for the years ahead, and that's what I would say the biggest trends are in our space right now.
So I'm going to echo visual listening is extremely important. It needs to get beyond logo recognition to product recognition. and also not just a product as a two-dimensional thing, but at different angles so we can see context. Also auditory listening, particularly with things like TikTok where you can only do listening by hashtags. Looking at podcasts, we also need to do auditory listening as well. Auditory listening comes up in a lot of different contexts. That's the second thing that I'd like to see on my wish list. The other one is AI, and AI can come up in a number of different ways. As a federal agency, we're concerned about issues of vote by mail that comes up and the integrity of the mail. It gets very politicized, and in the more recent cycle, we saw people fabricating images, and we saw people fabricating stories, and there's also the question of chatbots. And so where are we going to be with that? Is images developed by AI? Will there be a watermark on it? We'll be able to check its authenticity. If a lot of people are saying something and they're saying the same thing, is that an indication that these are real people who've all been to ChatGPT before? Or is it a chatbot who's saying the same thing over and over again? So in the political environment that I work in, I'm concerned about how AI is being used to represent or misrepresent reality and influence media.
Amazing. I love the content. I think you proved to the audience that you are indeed the experts. And now it's time for anyone who has questions. I'll hand over the microphone. Show of hands, anyone have questions? We have a little bit of time.